Tea Day that we used to have in at Harpoons.
All right.
So we rate everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight for the proposed budget public hearing. First up, we don't have Kelly here, so do we need to take a...
Sorry, Your Honor. Valerie French is taking notes and minutes remotely in her office.
Okay,
She is present and she is following along.
so should we do a roll call here?
Let me see if she can hear us.
I
Val,
can
if-
do that.
She can do it.
All right,
Thanks, Val.
Okay. Mayor McEachern,
I'm here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly,
Here.
Councilor Tabor,
Here.
Councilor Denton,
Here.
Councilor Moreau, absent. Councilor Bagley,
Here.
Councilor Lombardi,
Here.
Councilor Blaylock, absent. And Councilor Cook.
Here.
7 present, Your Honor.
Thank you, Valerie. We will hand it over to the city manager to go through the presentation. Afterwards, we will have a public hearing on the budget.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, City Councilors. I thought it was appropriate, since Judy and I will be presenting together, to share the space with her. Now, I might need one of my tech-savvy friends to tell me how to view the full screen in a PDF. Okay.
I'm happy to get up and start pushing buttons, but I think that's going to...
Okay, there we go. So we're here this evening, and we're pleased to present to you the proposed FY23 budget. In addition to thanking the finance team, I really would like to thank all of the staff involved. This was a true team effort to get us to this point. We're proud of what we have before you. We're happy to answer questions, and we appreciate the opportunity to walk you through this. So first is a reminder of what the budget is, and it's a statement of values, and those values are determined by working together among staff and with the council to develop long-term strategic planning goals, which we did in late January of this year. And before you tonight are the 7 articulated goals from that retreat and that planning session. And to sum up, the goals speak to community engagement, to increase participation, to more of a two-way street or two-way communication, understanding how best to communicate with and among the citizenry, and to articulate our support through what we do by offering services for housing and business retention, supporting arts and nonprofits, and speaking to larger issues of sustainability and resilience. But what I can tell you is that these goals are obviously in your budget, and we go into greater detail in why we do what we do for strategic planning, for goals and initiatives, starting on page 33. And to the extent that Judy and I will reference pages in the budget for those following along, we will certainly do that. But first and foremost is the 800-pound gorilla, or the impact that inflation has been having. As we prepare for this fiscal year, we're faced with inflationary pressures resulting from a host of issues, including pandemic-driven supply chain disruptions and utility increases. And we've seen that inflation increase from the 1.68 in February of just a year ago to over 8.5% this past March. So while we continue to have uncertainty, the good news in and amongst all this uncertainty is the pragmatic philosophy and the careful budgeting the city has followed for years. Our goal is to always flatten the curve and provide that glide path. So despite the challenges, despite inflation, we want to continue to move forward, and we're able to do so. And we can support the high demand that people have shown to develop here and to spend their money here. So to try and summarize some of the initiatives that are incorporated in the budget and some of the big impacts or drivers in this budget, and I should note that there are 8 listed here. There certainly are others, but these were the 8 of most note. And anecdotally, when we were preparing this for your consumption tonight, we anecdotally shared that this is the most drivers or most one-time or big impacts, some of which may have an uncertain component, that the staff has seen in recent memory. So I'll walk through some of these. Community campus is the property we've come to acquire in this calendar year, and we need to care and maintain that. We have ever increasing regulatory compliance issues that run the gamut from cybersecurity and software to pre-treatment requirements and covering mandates that are largely out of our control and dictated by other entities and with which we need to stay in compliance. We have the Economic Development Department to stand up this year, and we'll get into that shortly. We have the McIntyre settlement to address. We have the reorganization and the establishment of an in-house IT department. We have a contribution to the 400th celebration of our city's anniversary of coming into being. We have recognition that it costs to maintain additional parks and fields that previously had not been had not even been in existence to take care of, and now we are recognizing those needs. And number 8 speaks to across the board, somewhat of inflation, somewhat of supply chain, things that people may not always think about when they think about city services, but the cost of obtaining chemicals, the cost to work in a lab to stay in compliance with what we need to do. From there. So we'll hit head on the personnel staffing request as noted on page 172 of your budget document. The positions are outlined in detail there. Essentially, it breaks down as such: school department with 10.4, and you may ask, how do you get to a 0.4 of a person? In many instances, this is rounding up from a part-time to a full-time person. The police department is looking for 3 new individuals or 3 new positions, and in general government, we are seeking 9 new positions, 4 of which fall within the newly stood-up information technology department. In addition to the general fund items, we have a total of 4.6 falling within parking and transportation, Prescott Park, the water and the sewer funds, and we will break those down here, both here tonight if you like, and certainly when we study in greater detail each department's budget and each fund's budget. So to sum up the general fund proposed budget, the ask this year is for $133,208,000, a change or an increase of 6.78% or 5.37% as written in the budget that is notably below inflation. And I would call to your attention that in the current budget, which we're in now, as finalized, we saw an increase of $7.3 million or 6.14% over fiscal year 21. So it's in recognition with that we move forward with our request as follows. First up is operating, and these are the key components that comprise the operating budget. They're of no surprise to you. Other notables that will impact this budget include supplies, professional services, electricity, telephones, software and software maintenance, winter sand and salt, repairs to vehicles and equipment. All of that falls under the operating budget. And important to note as we speak to the key components of the operating budget is what the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, does to that number. At the present time, we're in negotiation with 10 of our 16 collective bargaining units. So for the 6 that are currently in a contract for whom this is not their contract sunset year, the COLA, the 10-year rolling average of the November to November CPI represents 5.31%, and to which the 10-year average becomes 2.05. You'll recall that we have a contract provision which calls for a COLA floor of 2% and a ceiling of 5%. So that is why the 2.05 is in play for the 6 currently active collective bargaining units. This chart summarizes for you, and I feel like we've showed it to you a lot, and it bears showing again. These are the 16 unions. The ones in white are the ones that currently have contracts in place for the next fiscal year 23. But we have set aside funds in a collective bargaining contingency line item for the 10 unsettled as of yet contracts for FY23. We are currently in negotiations, and we anticipate our ability to successfully negotiate for those 10 remaining units. And these figures include the contingency amount we have set aside includes such items as salaries, retirement, Social Security, and Medicare. So of the departmental proposed budgets, the increase is 5.28% or $5.19 million over last year. And of that, salaries and benefits make up 4.59%. And the check marks are worth noting. Those costs are increases associated with health insurance, dental and life and disability, federal and retirement obligations. This does reflect the addition of the 22.41 positions in the general fund. It does include a step increase for all personnel for the 6 unions that have a previously settled contract that are not on the top step yet, and the 2.05% COLA that we mentioned. And those 6 unions are police, ranking police, firefighters, fire officers, and paraeducators. So it's worth noting, as we did on page 5 of the budget message, that in addition to a COLA, the police and fire personnel are struggling, quite frankly, to recruit and retain the best qualified and motivated personnel and to be able to pay fair and reasonable salaries. We've asked both departments to provide comparables of where they fall relative to other departments, and we fall very low on the scale. And we can, as we go into the conversation tomorrow night, I'm sure it will come up with Acting Chief Maloney and with Chief Germain. But I think you would agree with me that it's the primary duty of the city to deliver a safe, welcoming, responsive, transparent, trusted, and well-managed community. And to do that, we've got to be in the business and in the running with other communities to retain and recruit qualified staff. So in addressing what is currently this competitive disadvantage, the Police Commission and the Fire Commission each discussed separately a 5% salary adjustment for their uniformed personnel. And I recommend and have proposed in this budget a 4% salary adjustment, monies for which are set aside in a separate contingency line item. And if they were adopted as recommended, these funds would be reallocated appropriately to the police and fire department. So here you'll see that the changes without salary adjustments are 4.8 for the police and 3.4, I'll round up, for fire. And if the 4% salary adjustments were included, police would see an increase of 7.09%, and fire would see an increase of 5.67%. Next would be a quick mention of where we are with New Hampshire retirement rates. As this is a biennium budget, we will not see a rate increase for FY23. That's the good news. So what we are budgeting here is a number that we understand to be the same number. It does not include retirement calculated and held aside for salary adjustments and collective bargaining contingency. That would be part of what we need to negotiate. And as a reminder, this slide paints the picture that ever since FY10, we have been contributing to the tune of $26 million over the 14 years since we've needed to contribute. And the cost for that contribution is the $26 million. So the good news, as I know the mayor and some of the councilors already know, is that there have been 2 bills in the legislature. The Senate voted to table a bill that would restore a small portion of the state contribution, but there's a current House bill, House 1221, which the Senate Finance Committee recommended and passed. This would provide a one-time payment equaling 7.5% of the retirement costs based on the actual payroll for FY22. This would be received as a one-time payment and would be recognized as revenue when we do receive it at some point in FY23. We are estimating that number at roughly $650,000 at this point. This matter is awaiting the governor's signature, and we would formally incorporate that revenue at the time of setting the tax rate, which would also be roughly the time we would receive that revenue. And we'll touch upon this topic again when we get to variables at the very end. I'm going to turn things over to Judy now. She's going to touch upon health insurance and our stabilization funds.
The city, as you know, has a number of long-term financial planning tool that provides for consistent budgeting planning from year to year. The 2 that I will speak over the next few slides will be the Health Insurance Stabilization Fund and the Leave at Termination Stabilization Fund, as they both affect the operating budget. The change in the health premiums has spiked up and down over the last several years, causing unpredictability for each department to budget appropriately. As you can see from the charts listed, shows where the premiums either went up or down over the last several years. We have 2 major health carriers. We have Health Trust, which is the health insurance for the fire, police, and municipal government, and the school department has school care. So as you can see from the charts, the volatility of the rates from year to year. And at one point, prior to 2002, each department was responsible for budgeting the total amount of the premiums within their budget. And this made it very, very difficult from year to year to be able to manage their budget and keep it consistent. And in any time throughout the year, if personnel changes or somebody's family status changes, this can really throw the budget. And so what was implemented back in 2002 was a health insurance reserve fund. And so we have reserves set aside in fund balance. And what we do, the main policy is really to take the 10-year rolling average of these changes and ask the departments to budget in accordance with that increase. And then on July 1 of each year, that appropriation is transferred over to another fund where those premiums are paid for. And then at the end of the year, if there's a surplus in that fund, it gets closed to the committed fund balance. And if there's a deficit, it is covered by the reserve that we have in that fund balance. So the table below here shows the fiscal year 22 appropriation of a little over $13 million. Now, last year when we talked about health insurance, we actually reduced the health insurance appropriation for each department roughly about 3% because we had enough in the stabilization reserve to cover any shortfall. But just trying to follow the policy heading into the budget process for 23, we took a 10-year average of 2.3% increase for general government, police, and fire, and then a 5.4% increase for health premiums for the school department. Now, as this table shows, though, that we estimate the city cost to be almost $14.5 million for the general fund. So even with this appropriation, we still anticipate that we'll be using over $900,000 from the reserve by the end of fiscal year 23. The leave-it termination is very similar to the health insurance. Leave-it termination is payments that are due to employees upon retirement or termination from the city. And prior to 1996, all employees were able to accumulate an unlimited amount of sick time. And then upon their termination, they were able to cash that sick time out. Well, this liability continued to grow in leaps and bounds, and so there was negotiations that took place within those collective bargaining agreements, and that said that anyone, and it varies, the date varies slightly amongst each union, but basically anyone that was hired after 1996 can no longer accumulate or cash out sick time upon termination. So there was also another part of this, too, is that prior to this date, each department also budgeted a termination amount within their individual departments. And again, this was hard to predict and hard to budget from year to year because you might have 3 people that are leaving or retirement, or you may have no one leaving or retiring. So in order to stabilize this budgeting process, we created the Leave It Termination Fund. And this would eliminate the spikes, which would negatively impact the department's operating budget. So each department annually budgets a fixed amount determined by an actuarial study that gets analyzed every 5 years or so, and we monitor it very carefully. And that, again, on July 1, that appropriation gets transferred over to that fund. And then anyone who leaves employment will be paid out of that fund. And again, if there's a surplus in that fund at the end of the year, it closes to the committed fund balance. And if there's a deficit, it gets paid for out of that committed fund balance. But the next slide actually shows a better little illustration of what has happened over the last several years, or since the inception of this fund. So here we have 4 different charts for general government, school, police, and fire. And the blue line represents the actual payouts upon termination. And the orange line represents the annual appropriation within that department. And we tried to level it, and then we also took an analysis and had to adjust from time to time so that they didn't get so far behind at the end of the year. So the orange line, you can see, like fire department, it was pretty level funded up until last year. So this total liability is really depleting, and because of that change in the collective bargaining, but it's never going to completely go away because we also pay any vacation time out of that fund. But it is the total liability is citywide is probably about 5.7 million, which it would have been astronomical if this never took place. So this next slide also talks about the leave of termination and where we are at this point. We do not recommend any increase to the departments for the appropriation for fiscal year 23. So we budget about $1 million. And the chart over to the right here talks about the percentage of employees that are still eligible for the sick leave. Now, these numbers are as the end of last fiscal year, so June 30th, 2021. Since then, we've had people who have left that were still eligible for sick payout. But as you can see, we're really getting down to like less than 10% of eligible employees. So this is really good news. And then this slide just summarizes the total operating budget. We talked about the departments themselves, but this also includes the collective bargaining contingency number, the uniform, police, and fire salary adjustment, as well as transfers. We do transfers to the indoor pool. We have transfer to Prescott Park Fund, and the general fund also has transfer to community campus for the support of that program there. So the total operating budget is an increase of $8.6 million, or 8.77%.
In contrast, we're seeing a proposed decline of 6.5% in the non-operating budget, and we'll walk through that now. But I really wanted to take a minute to highlight some of the employees, and you'll see photos of employees as we go. This is Prescott Park foreman Andy Tilbury. This, I believe, was from when we did our snow rodeo, when we were teaching the DPW folks were learning how to use the new equipment, because this really is the lifeblood of what we do. This really paints a good picture of the services we provide. So under non-operating, we will touch upon debt service, our obligation with Rockingham County tax, rolling stock, and capital outlay. So first up is debt service. And a reminder to all that the city's policy here is to use no more than 10% of annual appropriations toward our net debt service, so that we keep our payments and our debt manageable. And that obviously bodes well and favorably for us when we seek affirmation of our bond rating. So compared with the last year, we are heading downward slightly and looking and projecting a 7.64% net debt. And in part, this is due to the lowering debt because we would like to use ARPA monies for some of the items for which we may have used bonding. And you'll see a decrease of almost $438,000 in our interest payments because of that lowering debt. This is a slide about our obligation to the county, and the city has annually assessed its portion of the county budget based on the city's share of the equalization of property values for the entire community. And while we are the fourth most populous community out of 37 in Rockingham County, we do contribute the largest amount as shown on the graph here. And the next lowest is, we're at about 11.4, and the next community is Salem at under 10%. So the county held a hearing this past Friday, and they are on the same budget cycle as we are, and the state is working on establishing the equalized value, and all of that will be part of what is incorporated when we set the tax rate in October, November. But this chart shows the history of the actual county tax paid, and at this point we're anticipating that we might be at the same proportionate rate of 11.4%. Based on some feedback we're understanding, that may go down that would support our budget rather than be a greater burden. But the DRA will adjust that no matter what we place as a placeholder in our budget. So we feel comfortable going with the increase of 2% as originally contemplated by the county. Next is rolling stock. The total request here is $983,600, of which 601 would come from general fund and 382 would be utilizing ARPA funds, which would help offset the tax rate to the tune of 6 cents. You'll recall that we've been slashing, I'll use that word, the rolling stock requests in the midst of COVID. We're looking to restore rolling stock. It's very important to the glide path for that part of our budget, and that's how we arrive at the 983,000. And we recommend this with the opportunity to utilize ARPA diligently for the police and fire vehicles as depicted on the chart on the right. And then we speak to capital outlay, and our request is 1.31 million, or 1.04% of prior year appropriations. And you'll remember that the policy is to stay within 2% of prior year appropriations. And this chart will show you that over the last 10 years, the average has been just under 1.6 million, and this number is keeping well within that average. Here's the list of items that comprise capital outlay. It's also found in page 22 of your budget book. A couple of notes here of the city manager adjusted column. Number one, the fire department will be receiving a $50,000 grant from Gopher, which offsets the need for city funding, which is great. The next offset or reduction speaks to the skate park project or the Greenland Road Recreation Facility. You'll recall that on December 20th of last year, the former city council adopted a supplemental appropriation of $2.2 million funded by unassigned fund balance for the proposed skateboard park. And the city will use $200,000 of that $2.2 million from that supplemental appropriation for the design work. And as the CIP for fiscal years 23 to 28, as adopted by you all on March 7th, will display, we recommend planning for bonding for this project in FY24, a total of $1.805 million, with $195,000 in donations anticipated to complete the project. So this action will result in the $200,000 listed above as no longer necessary, because we've already used it from the unassigned fund balance. And then the third note would be under sound barriers in the residential area along I-95. The city has been notified that the state will be installing these sound barriers along the Panaway side of I-95, and no local match, as we initially contemplated, will be needed. This chart summarizes our suggestion for the use of ARPA funds, and to use ARPA funds in the amount of 1.037 would approximate a 16-cent reduction in the tax rate, hence the reason we'd like to spread this out so all taxpayers benefit. We did take steps over the 2 previous fiscal years, as you will recall, to delay a number of capital outlay projects, rolling stock and IT equipment purchases identified in our CIP, and we feel that it is time to resume these necessary infrastructure needs and replacement of these aging equipment and vehicles in a prudent manner, and in a manner that allows for proper use of ARPA funding. So the following items, and there are 8 of them here total, some of them are identified in the CIP, some of them as capital outlay, some are in rolling stock. And the last item speaks to IT upgrades or replacements that have been contemplated for quite some time now with police through our public safety records management computer-aided dispatch system. They will utilize $250,000 in the proposed FY23 budget, and then the plan would be to use an additional $650,000 in ARPA funds to complete the purchase through FY24 to 26. The city has already, speaking to planning efforts, secured $400,000 from prior year capital outlay reserve. So there's a lot of planning that goes into this, and a lot of forecasting on the part of staff as to the best use of funds and the most prudent way to spend taxpayer dollars. So to sum up, this is the proposed non-operating budget, as mentioned, with a reduction of 6.55% over the prior fiscal year for a total of $26.2 million, or a reduction of 1.8%.
So that is the expenditure side of the house, and now we want to address the estimated revenues. The budget document, starting on page 129, has some great detail on a lot of the larger, a description on each of the revenues, and then some graphs that demonstrate some of our larger revenue sources. But overall, our estimated increase for revenues is about $1.3 million, or 4.2 from fiscal year 22. And I'm just going to highlight some of the major ones here. The net changes for local sources is, surprisingly, we have continued to see an increase in motor vehicle registrations. Between 2020 and 2021, there was 1,077 more registrations, and totaling 26,182 registrations, which really is the highest number that I can remember. So it's kind of surprising that people are still buying vehicles, and so we are increasing that revenue about $50,000. We also see an increase in the Pease Development Authority Airport District, which is based off of the valuation out there, and that is a revenue source. And about $186,000 in water sewer overhead. And this is the amount the general fund charges the water sewer departments for the use of the legal department in the space and whatnot. So that's an overhead that's been in effect for many, many years. On the school revenue side, we're estimating an increase of over $222,000, primarily from school tuition. And the use of fund balance is where we're seeing a decrease. So anytime that there's a use of a fund balance, whether it's through supplemental appropriation or through the budget process, it is recorded as a revenue. So this 2.8 million, or close to 2.9 million, in the use of fund balance, we're not going to be using in this fiscal year 23. We're still using use of fund balance, but the net difference is a negative 2.9 million. So that's a decrease on the revenue side. And then for state revenues, we did see an increase in rooms and meals last year. We're up to about 30% distribution from the state, which we used to be at 20% for several years. So we're estimating an increase going forward in FY23 from what we know at this point. And then what's new this year, and only for this year, is that the state has announced that the city will receive a little over $3 million in a one-time state adequate education grant. So the New Hampshire budget included a one-year, $1 million reduction in the statewide education property tax. But in order to hold harmless those communities, which Portsmouth is one of them, they are budgeting like $15.3 million, which equates to about $3 million for the city of Portsmouth. But this is only for 1 year only, so this would be for fiscal year 23. So the use of fund balance, and we talk about offsetting the tax rate. So this is where, fund balance is where there might be surpluses from year to year. This is where we keep our reserves for our stabilization funds. But on page 141 of your budget document has a good description on the use of fund balance and where that arrives from. But as you can see, for the last several years, we have used an average about $3.4 million. In fiscal year 22 alone, we used $5,696,000. We had use of debt reserve of 1.9, reserve for tax appraisals of 100,000, and then the McIntyre operations of 480,000, and that was done through the budget process. After the budget was adopted, there were 3 supplemental appropriations. One was the skateboard park for $2.2 million, community campus $116,000, and the McIntyre settlement and design for $900,000. So that brings the annual budget up by that amount. In FY23, we anticipate utilizing $2.8 million through the budget process, 1.7 in debt reserve, 100,000 from tax appraisals, and the McIntyre settlement of $1 million. So once the budget is adopted, and right now we're proposing the $133 million, and of course this might change through the budget process itself, you take that expenditure and you subtract our estimated revenues. So our estimated revenues, and that would include the use of fund balance, equals a little over $32 million. And the difference between the appropriation and the estimated revenues is the tax levy. Now, as we know, in the state of New Hampshire, property taxes is the primary revenue source to fund local services. And so the tax levy here is calculated at a little over $100 million. Now, what's important to know here is once this is finalized, this is the number that the DRA will utilize in setting the tax rate. So regardless of a revaluation, and I know that we've talked about the revaluation coming up, it doesn't mean we're raising more money. The tax levy will stay the same once the budget is adopted. And then once the budget's adopted, but of course the state will adjust any revenues that are appropriate to set the tax rate, but the tax levy will stay the same.
I think it's my turn next, but before we move off this slide, I think in addition to stating that the property tax levy amount doesn't change, what will change is the way the pie is distributed. So just keep that in mind. So as we're looking to understand what a proposed tax rate would be if this proposed budget were adopted as presented, it would result in an estimated tax rate increase. The new tax rate would be $15.71, which represents a 68-cent increase, or 4.5%. And this shows with the median single-family residential home, that would equate to roughly a $324 annual increase or a $27 monthly increase. As we talked about the potential offset, and we'll get to that with the variable slide coming up, if we were to benefit from a contribution from the state for police, fire, and teachers of 7.5%, that would equate to money to the city of $650,000 or thereabouts, which would take another 10 cents off the tax rate. So things to keep in mind, and that's the first of our three noted variables here. The second would be whether the Rockingham County tax obligation comes in at 2% or something lower. And of course, the one super unpredictable item would be interest income. As you know, last week the feds raised the rate 50 basis points, which hasn't been seen in 22 years. There's even discussion that they may raise the rates by 100 basis points in July. So what we will do is reevaluate interest income before the budget is passed. And our current estimated revenue for interest is $180,000 and change, and this could mean a significant increase in that number. So to be determined. And the last slide before we really look to wrap up would be to point out that in an attempt to use our very successful rate stabilization model, which was first implemented back in fiscal year 14 to address long-term financial planning and major capital needs, we would be proposing, and we'll get into greater detail next Wednesday at the work session, an increase of 3% in water rates and 6% in sewer rates, which equate to the approximations you see here, 70 cents per month for the average residential customer who uses 5 units a month. I'm proud to say we use 4 units a month in our household. And the sewer increase would be $4.45 for a residential user. So last slide here is what we look to for the budget schedule and which night we'll have each department in greater detail. But in bold, you'll see, and this is for the benefit of the public at home, a chance for the community to join the council and senior staff in a budget dialogue, which will be a more informal and a candid conversation where we will split up around the city. There will be 3 counselors and a staff assigned to each of these locations, the Portsmouth Middle School at an earlier time, and both the Senior Activity Center and the Fire Station 2 at the later time. So folks who may not be comfortable with the public hearing session format or calling in on Zoom can come and speak to the council in a more informal setting. And as mentioned, the goal would be to adopt the budget at the June 6th council meeting. So with that, Mayor, thank you, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, City Manager. I believe we have the public hearing next, so I'll open up the public hearing. Anyone who wants to approach the microphone, please do so. Just state your name, if you're a resident, and We will open that now. Going once. All right.
Sorry, I'm James Parkington, 592 Dennett Street.
James.
I don't know if it's early for this, because I know there's going to be a lot of public discussion, but I wanted to make sure that the skate park money was in the budget. That's all I wanted to do. From my review of it, I have a background in infrastructure. It seemed like that may have been taken out, but I may have misread it. The funding for the design, and maybe I've missed it. But I want to make sure that that project is put on the front burner, above DPW, gas filling stations, and other things that I saw some significant funds put into that didn't need to be addressed until the 0 to 3 year time frame. So I want to make sure, and we all know costs are going up. So design costs are going up, material costs are going up, construction costs are going up. Construction in general is going through the roof. I work in it day in, day out. So please make sure that project, the design, is funded, and we start looking to get more money ready for it, because we have a lot of kids that need a place to go in this city. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Anybody else to speak? Okay, I will close.
Your Honor, is there anybody online?
There is no one online.
Okay.
No one online. So I'm going to close the public hearing. I will, I look forward to the public dialogue sessions. Typically, the public hearing is a one-way street, so I will break from that since we had one speaker and speak to the funding that Karen, or the city manager just alluded to. But typically, a public hearing is one way. We hear from you. We don't answer that, but that was somewhat difficult to understand. We funded last year through fund balance $2.2 million with the hope that we could get through design and be ready to build by this spring. Working with the Pillar Design Group, we are only going to be through, per all of the things that the speaker mentioned, all of the people that want to build skate parks in particular, we'll only be through 30% of design by the fall. And so the $200,000 is remaining for the design. And then in the CIP, the remaining $2 million is slated for when construction will begin. And that is hopefully, provided everything goes according to plan, next year. But that money is there for those watching at home. But that was unusual that we would respond to that directly, and look forward to the public dialogue sessions, which I will just call out again as Thursday, May 19th, at the following locations: 5:30 to 6:30 at the middle school, and then 7 to 8 at the senior center, and also 7 to 8 at Fire Station 2 in the George Pierce Training Room. So with that, it's not on the agenda, but any council questions on this? No? All right. Well, for those of you who are rooting for the Celtics, I hope they tie it up tonight. And I will close the meeting and look forward to seeing everyone back here tomorrow evening. Thank you very much, Portsmouth.